current realities, in Nigeria, media, terrorism, and national security, addressing the complexities. And I think it speaks to the heart of the national concerns. I have written a couple of things, but in the light of the time available to us, I do not think I'll be able to go through all, so I'm going to be skipping. And I also thought that it's necessary to clarify a few issues that have attended towards, at least in the last couple of days. I think I should make a comment in that regard, since we're men and women who shape narratives, and for us to be able to shape those narratives from a position of understanding and knowledge. And I had also prepared slides. I thought that there would be multimedia, where you can also follow, but then that is not available, no problem. So I just thought I should bring that in context. Now, the media across the world has evolved into a strategic actor in shaping perceptions of global peace, conflict, and collective security. In recent decades, the role of the media in influencing terrorist narratives, recruitment, and counter-terrorism strategies has gained unprecedented attention from international institutions. As terrorism continues to adapt across continents, media reportage and framing have become powerful tools capable of either mitigating or magnifying tone and ethical responsibilities of coverage. It is therefore evident that media practices have far-reaching consequences on how societies interpret and respond to terror incidents, thereby influencing the strength and resilience of state security systems. Moreover, as transnational terrorism becomes more networked, the power of communication technologies in shaping public sentiment and governmental response has grown very profoundly. According to the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism, over 80% of extremist propaganda circulates through mainstream and alternative media outlets, reinforcing the urgency for responsible reporting. Therefore, understanding the dynamic interplay between media influence and terrorist communication strategies provides a compelling foundation for advancing collective security and strengthening national security. This is more important because every one of us who belong or who come, not only do we come from this geographical space, we also do our business, we live, within the geographical space. Remarkably, contemporary global realities have underscored how terrorism strategically exploits media channels to amplify fear and influence public perception. The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO for short, observes that distorted news dissemination intensifies public anxiety and destabilizes cooperative security efforts among states. Similarly, the World Economic Forum notes that coordinated misinformation campaigns have escalated radical narratives, thereby complicating counter-terrorism coordination. In response, nations have progressively strengthened professional media reportage through collaborative policy reforms and interagency information protocols aimed at enhancing counter-terrorism and national security. In democratic societies, the legitimacy of national protection rests on the ability to defend life and order without undermining justice, freedom, or the public's right to know. This is so because when courage gives way to silence and any perceived danger is used as justification for stifling critique, the very safeguards intended to protect society can become a threat. Hence, national security is viewed as the strategies, institutions, including the media, laws, and internal and external threats. So the media remains part and parcel of that institution that encompasses the architecture for national security. So, ladies and gentlemen, the relevance of today's discourse cannot be overemphasized. Nigeria's security challenges are deeply intertwined with the dynamics of media representation and public's access to credible information. According to the National Security Strategy 2019, effective security management depends not only on intelligence gathering and military response, but also on how the media interprets and disseminates information about such operations to the citizenry. Scholars such as Nwabweze and Asema have also argued that partnership between journalists and security operatives could reduce terrorist propaganda by over 40% when properly institutionalized. I therefore wish to stress that the media remains a vital pillar in counterterrorism communication, capable of strengthening or weakening public trust in governance, depending on how reports are structured. Indeed, the National Broadcasting Commission has continuously emphasized responsible journalism in conflict-sensitive reporting, as misinformation or sensational coverage has often exacerbated public fear and hindered military operations in counter-insurgency zones. This situation demands urgent reflection and ethical reorientation among media professionals on how best to report issues of national security without compromising state strategy or public confidence. Hence, it becomes imperative that we collectively explore strategic mechanisms that will promote responsible media engagement in the national security architecture. Now this leads me to the aim, which is to guide our collective reasoning towards strengthening professional collaboration, ensuring responsible reportage, and addressing the evolving complexities of media, terrorism, and national security in Nigeria. And by virtue of the script that I've prepared, I thought that I needed to make some, the esteemed, audience. I do not think that I need to go into the nitty-gritty of conceptual clarification. But what needs to be stated regarding the media, I can't be defining and then giving a concept of media when I'm dealing with media executive. But then I thought that you should have insight as to, the standpoint for some of the representations I've made, where that kind of understanding is coming from. So it is in that light that I needed to stress that the media in Nigeria operates not merely as an information channel, but as a national stabilizing instrument. I think that is quite instructive. Furthermore, one must recognize that the manner in which the media reports acts of terrorism significantly shapes public perception and governmental response. So let us have that somewhere at the back of our mind. Again, terrorism is also one of the concepts, since that's what the topic covers. Again, it's not also my intention to give, a literary or, if you like, intellectual treatise on what terrorism encompasses, but for us to have, to bring it home in that sense. So, from a domestic point of view, given what our law says, the Act, Terrorism Act, what it says. It sees terrorism as any act, and note, any act that involves violence or the threat of violence against persons or property intended to intimidate, coerce, or destabilize the government or society. This definition reflects the contextual realities of Nigeria's security environment, and I think it's nice for us to keep that in context. Because sometimes when laws are passed, we must also take interest in the process of lawmaking, because when it becomes law, then it now rests on those who are to implement, to enforce those laws, including the media. So you can't accuse those who are implementing the laws that you supervise the enactment of those laws. You are accusing them of enforcing the laws that you were a process you are a part of the process that brought that law into being. I think this is actually the context in which I thought that terrorism, must be brought into context, in part by way of clarification. Again, national security, I've written a good number of things which I believe that as you see it, you'll be able to get an answer. But then, I also thought it's necessary for me to emphasize that from a national perspective, that is, talking about national security, the Nigerian National Security Strategy 2019 views the concept of national security as the capacity of the state to preserve its sovereignty, ensure the protection of its citizens, defend its territorial integrity, and maintain peace, law, and order. It underscores the interconnection between democratic stability, economic resilience, and the protection of civil liberties as pillars of a secure nation. This definition, in my view, is considered most appropriate within our context since it reflects the security realities, like I mentioned, of our environment. So, by our interaction today, we should see national security as the sustained ability of the state to safeguard its territory or its territorial integrity, democratic institutions, and citizens' welfare against internal and external threats, while fostering peace, social justice, and sustainable development. So this is what I would like us to keep in mind. Now that we are done with the clarification of concept, I thought it's also necessary for us to look at the nature of the roles of media in support of terrorism efforts in Nigeria. Now, how can I be talking about the roles of the media when actually media professionals are the one I'm addressing? Again, it's essential for me to underscore that many of the roles that you perform, one of which, of course, information and surveillance in counterterrorism, is for a purpose, is within a certain context, and that context I've actually clarified in the contextual clarification. The next, of course, is agenda setting. I think since yesterday, if there's anything we've had and that has been drummed into our ears, is a rehash of the fact that you are men and women that shape opinions. You frame discussions. The context, you are the one who set the agenda, and among several other things. But the point here is, when you are setting the agenda as part and parcel of your rules, and I think that's exactly what the keynote speaker was trying to talk about yesterday. But then, in particular, since we are within the national security context, and we're not dealing with other external issues that have to do with politics, even though it's part, all right? Security, and national security must be viewed, especially terrorism, must be viewed from the point of view that you, not only are you a player, a stakeholder, you are the one that is shaping what others must get to know. So how do you want them to know of what you are reporting on? Now, again, as those who mobilize, who are channels of social mobilization and social cohesion, as well as de-radicalization, again, the same question needs to be asked over and over again. Now, let me, shift a little bit, away from some of the rules, which I believe that when you get the paper, you also see them. I thought it's necessary for me to also talk about the Guild of Editors, to also commend all your efforts, what you've been doing over the years, ensuring that the right narratives are being churned out to the public, and then for us to also know how we can guide government, to be able to work in sympathy to the realities and objective of the desires of those that are led. And so the Nigerian Guild of Editors have remained at the forefront, at the forefront of institutional, emphasize the fact that you have been quite vocal in ensuring that national security issues are brought to proper context. You have provided a forum where editors discuss the ethical challenges of covering counterinsurgency without amplifying terrorist propaganda. And I think it's necessary for us to put that in context. Additionally, the Guild has organized capacity building workshops in Abuja, Lagos, and Maiduguri in collaboration with the Office of the National Security Advisor. and the International Press Center. These programs have trained over 350 editors and reporters on conflict-sensitive reporting and counterterrorism communication strategies. And I think it's quite commendable on your part, and I think you should also encourage yourself in that sense. I also note, and part of my research for this, that the Guild of Editors have maintained productive partnerships with international organizations, including UNESCO, the European Union, in order to enhance editorial quality in terrorism reportage. Its public statements often emphasize the need for unity and discourage narratives that stigmatize communities affected by insurgency. Now, why I'm bringing up all this is that as we go into the meat of the presentation, when I say things that are not pleasant to you, you must also know that we have noted some of the things that you have done. And I thought that it's necessary for me to balance such representations. Now, why should we have media, if you like, media security agencies engagement? Why? The trust quotient within the society, and I think that has come clear, even in some of the representations that the keynote speakers spoke about yesterday, validates this point that I'm making here. The trust quotient within societies and their government determines the type of collaboration with the media. For Nigeria, the quotient is, very sadly, abysmally low. The idea for collaborative media engagement and upscaling the media reportage systems to curtail terrorism incidences and enhance national security has been exploited by different countries. And in the paper, I talked about what the French government also did to be able to see that they have an engagement with I've called the security architecture along with the media, engaging to see how best to be able to bring down the level of violence that they were witnessing at some point, and which, of course, gave rise to a significant improvement, such that the media reportage improved by 37%, in addition to misinformation that, of course, declined. Now, one may ask, within our climb, what is the metrics? How do we measure, some of the engagement, especially now that we're having this kind of engagement? What are the indices that we use to be able to measure if the trend is going to go up or it's going to go down? But that's a different discussion altogether. But I'm saying that in various countries that attempts have been made in this regard. Ditto for Pakistan and, of course, for Sri Lanka, among several others. But for us in Nigeria, we must understand that the interplay between media, reportage, terrorism, and national security continues to define the character of the nation's internal stability and global image. Over the years, the Nigerian media has played a central role in shaping narratives around insecurity, insurgency, and public perception of state response institutions and mechanisms. However, the growing complexities of terrorism, particularly from groups such as Boko Haram and ISWA, have challenged traditional journalistic practices and national security operations. According to the Global Terrorism Index, Nigeria ranks 8th among countries most affected by terrorism, with over 1,200 terrorism-related deaths recorded in 2023 alone. Ironically, the data for such analysis come from local sources. That is, the Global Terrorism Index, all right, those behind it, they are not, of course, they may have roots here in the country, but a greater part of the data they have used to be able to compile that table comes from men and women, many of us that are here. It comes from within. So meaning that the statistics, of course, underscores the need for us to deliberate, for us to be able to see what we need to do. Why do we need external bodies to tell us how bad things are? Why do we have to depend on external sources to believe the story? This is the point. It is like the Trump tweet, which has now generated a lot of discussion. Must we get to that point until external actors? I think that is the point that we have to make, which as journalists, as editors, we also must begin to, focus on such issues. That we do not need external prompting before be able to, act appropriately. Now, what are some of the challenges that are associated with the media in support of counter-terrorism operations? But before I give out the challenges, There are complexities. The complexities associated with media and terrorism stem from the need to balance freedom of press and national security concerns. On one hand, the terrorists feed on extensive media coverage to promote their ideology. In this regard, the media becomes a tool in the hands of terrorist organizations. And I think the point, we can't but keep, rehashing the point, which is that sometimes, at least within our environment, we don't seem to understand that the aim of the terrorists is to use you and I to propagate whatever aims and objectives, of course they are ignoble, that they are, but without we knowing. And this is the reason why there is need for us to have engagement. That is, when I say we now, I'm talking about the conventional, all right, if like the architecture, national security architecture framework, as it were, to have that kind of engagement, and for you to also see yourself to be part and parcel of it. On the other hand, excessive media coverage can create confusion and sometimes hinder efforts of agencies involved in counterterrorism operations. The media could thus be seen as glorifying terrorist activities. This is even more profound given that the trust quotient of government over the years is so low. Besides, open source media, reinforced by social media, complicates the situation. As a result, a delicate balancing act is necessary to ensure that while reporting activities of terror groups for public knowledge, the objective of counterterrorism measures shouldn't be diminished. That's why sometimes the caption that you give to stories, all right? Yes, somebody talked about the need to sell, the need to make business and all that. I believe that the aim can still be achieved without actually glorifying, or if you like, giving attention, greater attention to the criminals who have perpetrated an act as against, those who are actually, making the effort to ensure that those criminals are brought to justice. So the point here is to say that the complexities stems from what kind of balancing are we giving? How are we in an attempt to report, or if you like, meet your responsibility, your task, your roles as men and women of the media? Are you glorifying the criminals amongst us, or you are amplifying the efforts of those that are countering those efforts? Now, in terms of the challenges, I also know that there has been an escalation and diffusion of violence today in our environment, and I think this is where we need to pay a lot of attention, in the sense that what ordinarily would have been a police responsibility, we are no longer able to draw a line to know when the military should be called in for such an operation. Now, and so, where you have maybe what used to be armed robbery, or if you like, minor stealing, or case of two fighting in quote, amongst others, because we have had repeated incidents of violence involving terrorist organizations, we are not able to dissect, or if you like, to separate them, and we lump them up and they become what we report as terrorism. So that is a challenge, and I think that because also there is a general sense of insecurity across the country, you being able to, as media, for your foot soldiers in the field, the ability to be able to assess the correct status of event is also a challenge. So that diffusion is a challenge, which I must note. There's also the legal ambiguity and press freedom concerns, which I also think that is a challenge, part of which I've mentioned earlier on, which remains a challenge. But then, in spite of these challenges, it is necessary for you to know that you still have to maintain some form of balance. I also know that there are institutional and ethical constraints that you have. Now, yesterday, I know that the challenge of AI, was mentioned, after the opening ceremony, among several other issues, all right? And then even the communication infrastructure we have across the country. And I also note what the president of the Guild made mention in terms of presenting, challenges of the Guild to Mr. President. all those structural issues, because you are not operating outside an environment. So the communication infrastructure that we have, of course, they are a bit inadequate, but then that they are inadequate, does that mean now that you are no longer going to operate within the bounds of what the profession expects? No. So it is working, it is the same way when the military and the police, they are accused of not responding without actually asking whether their training, their equipment, and other administrative issues have been properly taken into account. You expect someone to perform, but then you are not interested to know whether he is equipped to perform. I think that remains. So it's the same way here, that yes, you have issues that are infrastructural issues, that are technical issues that constrain you from performing certain functions. But then it is also essential for you to be able to do that. And in spite of those challenges that you have, there are things that you must do. On this, Adebi has found that the Nigerian media coverage of the Bring Back Our Guest campaign initially raised awareness, but also risks reinforcing Boko Haram's agenda by giving disproportionate visibility to the actions of the terrorists. Such dilemmas reveal the tension between journalists' duty to inform and the ethical responsibility to avoid glorifying terror. This is part and parcel of what I witnessed as a Lieutenant Commander of Operation Lafia Dole. Because at that time, of course, there were a lot of issues. Things that ought to be left within the realm of partisan political discussions have now brought into the realm of national security conversation, which, it is the duty of editors to be able to make that distinction, so that when people want to use national security issues to campaign, then it should be your responsibility to change the narrative and set the agenda properly, so that we'll keep issues that are partisan in nature within the realm of such discussions. But then national security issues cover every one of us. So this is why today questions are being asked. We have been in this counterterrorism for such a long time, over 15 years. We have transcended political regimes, from one political party to another. But it has not stopped, because the prism of discussion has been within the context, missing the context. Instead of us seeing it from a national a perspective that involves everyone, we want to think that it is a party A versus party B, and because party A has not done this, this is exactly where we are. Today, the story is different. I do hope that going forward, and I'm glad that in the sub-team, talked about 2027, so that we'll begin to leave issues of national security out of the agenda that we're going to be setting for political parties, which should, in my view, should be able to tell the political parties to tell us what their manifestos or what they intend to do over certain critical areas, and not for us to think that because so and so party has failed, then I want to believe that you get the point where I'm driving it at. Inadequate institutional coordination between the media and security agencies. Again, this is also a challenge. I as CDS, I know that I had engagement with a good number of you, and but then that is just as the military. But you see, I believe that part of the errors that we have made in the past is to see this war that we're fighting, that is the counter-insurgency war, counter-terrorism war, as something that is left for the military and the security agencies. No, it is the people's war. It is the national war. It is a national war. So the tools, the instruments, the various agencies of government that are responsible for certain actions are not the one to explain what they are doing with respect to the task that the state has given to them. And I think this point we need, and as editors, you need to put that in context, so that you don't unduly put pressure on the agencies, if you like, distracting the agencies that are doing certain work. You should hold government accountable, because it is the state. The government represents the state. It is the state that has tasked these agencies. Do not see these agencies as part and parcel. They are two. Let's get it. These agencies are tools of the government. They are tools of the state. The state has given them a responsibility. So it is the state, in this case, the government, that you should hold accountable, you should interrogate as to what their response has been. The reason why many of us, this time you want to meet, you ask the security agencies to come and give you briefing on what they are doing about the war. No, they are not the one fighting the war. It is the state. It is the state that you should go to. What are you doing about this? When we talk about military subordination to civil authority, that's exactly what it means. It is the civil that takes responsibility for actions or inactions of all the agencies of government, including the military. I hope this sinks well. So it is from that point that you now begin to, the challenge of the limited or inadequate engagement with security agencies can be minimized. But if you think that by going individually to the police, to the military, or to customs, and so on and so forth, that's how we're going to solve the problem, it will be without end. I also note that as part of the challenge that we have, that are weak regulatory oversights and ethical breaches that we have in counter-terrorism reporting. I want to believe that the National Press Council and the Union of Journalists, of course, have permitted permitted sensational terrorism coverage. Given some, they have given some guidelines with respect to sensational terrorism coverage reporting. But in any case, I also believe that some publications have unintentionally amplified security propaganda. Notably, during the several Boko Haram attacks in 2019, unverified videos and inflated casualty figures circulated widely. Given the generally gullible frame of mind of the Nigerian society, it intensified public panic and inadvertently aided the terrorist psychological warfare. Because this war is also a war of the mind. The whole essence of terrorism is to make the populace to believe that they are larger than who they are, is to captivate the mind of the citizens. So if by your reporting you are encouraging such approach, then of course you are contributing to their psychological warfare. War has different strands. There are physical aspects and there are mental aspects. The psychological warfare is a part and parcel of the mental aspect. It's a mental war that is going on in our minds. And I think that's where the media comes in, to be able to help us to address that mental line of operation. Now, I also know that there are challenges of contextual alignment of foreign media, and I think that we need to also pay attention to this. As a direct consequence of limited capacity of local media, most times the foreign media have been relied upon for news on counter-terrorism in Nigeria. This is most appalling, as it presents the challenge of misalignment of the context of the foreign media reportage. Globally, national interests prevail. Thank you very much. Globally, national interests prevail with nations interacting on the international stage. The framing and contents of news items are usually crafted to first satisfy the interest. Thank you. To first satisfy the interest, that is, locally. And if it is from an external source, there is a basis for churning out such, frames to the country of interest. So it is not because of you, it's not for your interest first. It is first for the interest of the reporting country. And we must understand that. Our experience, in most cases, has shown reportage on our counter-terrorism efforts by some foreign media are tangential to the operational objectives. The Reuters and Amnesty International have been seen at the forefront of promoting narratives that are misaligned. Regrettably, local media houses have relied on these platforms to propagate views to the detriment of counter-terrorism objectives. I have tons and tons of experiences on this. The Reuters report of in 2022 is a case in point. And what they also said in 2014 was also a case in point, wherein, our local media, more or less, heightened the report that Amnesty International as well as Reuters, they came up. And that's why at that time, I had to approach the National Human Rights Commission to please come to investigate the armed forces. And they did. And at that time, of course, there were some external interests that came to me to say, are you sure that National Human Rights Commission, they are well suited for this duty? Can you imagine? External actors came to me just because it was published that I made a request. I wrote National Human Rights Commission to say, please come and investigate us based on this report. Because the local media were hyping it. And from behind, these local actors external actors came to me to ask me, are you sure that National Human Rights Commission, they are equipped enough to be able to investigate? Don't you think they will need our support? That tells you that something is behind it. So I'm trying to say that for us as men and women of media, if you get any external report, especially on national security issues, all right, I am wearing this shoe. If it's paining me, I should be the one to tell where it's paining me. We should be able to interrogate why, what's the basis for this interest? Do not hook, line, and sinker, publish what has been said. And I thought that has been. Now, what are some of the strategies that I'm suggesting? I believe that there should be, coordinated national guidelines for counterterrorism reporting. Of course, there is a coordinated task force comprising, and this is the little addition to that guideline. A coordinated task force comprising editors, security agencies, and human rights organizations should be established to develop comprehensive guidelines for terrorism reporting. These guidelines should cover verification standards, framing of narratives, ethical use of imagery, and protection of sources. I also think that if we're able to embed these practices into the professional culture of Nigerian journalism, the media can strengthen its watchdog role while avoiding unintentional amplification of terrorist extremist propaganda. Of course, what I'm suggesting, of course, should be able to create the guidelines for them to be able to operate in this. Next, of course, is legal and institutional reform. Yesterday, I think the president of the guild made mention to the president and some of the problems that are legal in nature, which he's requesting the president to intervene, and I do not need to belabor that point. I also believe that there is need for capacity building and communication infrastructure, and in this, I also think that, that the concept of peace journalism, and as well as investigative journalism that seek to advance peaceful coexistence, factual and conflict-sensitive reporting should be the focus, such that, if we're able to improve on the communication infrastructure that we have in place, and of course, by the interrogations that you also make, by engaging with the Ministry of Communications, all right, then of course you'll be able to know what should aid your field work in terms of report writing, in terms of investigation, among several other issues. But what is important is that at the end of the day, your interest should be what should bring peace to our environment. And I think this is the point I'm making, that when capacity building efforts are properly concretized, it will help you to achieve. Institutionalizing media security engagement. It is necessary to emphasize that the most pressing needs in Nigeria's counterterrorism architecture is structured cooperation between the media and security institutions. Accordingly, I am suggesting that a National Media Security Coordination Council under the Federal Ministry of Information and National Orientation could serve as a formal platform for intelligence information exchange. And I think that if we're able to do that, such an institution, such a council will enable regular joint briefings, verified updates, and guided access to operational details, thereby eliminating the sensational, or if you like, conflicting narratives that often undermine national security communications. This takes into account the concept of citizens' media, what I call the citizens' media, which sees the media as builders of nations. They shape the society, what you say is what you get. It is what you say as media. That's exactly what you get. So this is why I'm saying, and which I said earlier on, that it is not for the security agencies to go to explain what they have done. It is this council, under the supervision of the Minister of Communication, around Minister of Information, that, of course, with military, police, and other agencies' representation, that should be able to come up with how narratives can be shaped. Because at the end of the day, what you, as editors, what you say is exactly what you are going to get. It's what the nation is going to get. So the media, in that sense, becomes, the media practitioner becomes a partner. So that whatever you do, and at every point in time, you should be able to ask yourself, what next I'm going to do, what I'm going to report, what I'm going to direct my subordinates to do. Is that, how good is it, not just for my organization, but for the nation at large, and so on and so forth. Then I also think, as a suggestion, that there has to be a strengthening of media regulation and ethical accountability. And I think that the part of the suggestions that the president made in his opening address yesterday should be able to address that. And I also believe that, and this is for government spokespersons, that there has to be an enhancement of public relations disposition of government. I also observe, from outside the media, that there's a need to make a distinction between public relations and journalism coverage or journalism reportage. Government spokespersons must be measured, less combative in responding to citizens' inquisitions. I think the tendency to be very abrasive, we need to begin to take that out. So, as government spokesperson, your responsibility is to ensure that the people understand, or you communicate what government is doing in a manner that it will be acceptable, but not to go ding-dong, attacking, and then very combative. And I think that shouldn't be. The whole essence is that, you'll be able to, spokespersons must be measured, possessing the aptitude for restraint, maturity, and controlled communication, controlled messaging, to be able to build confidence in the people, and not for you, after you have finished speaking, everybody is angry with you, and even angry with government, even when government has done well. And I think this is what we need to do. Now, before I conclude, I made mention that, I was going to say a few things, which has to do with, it has relationship with even counterterrorism. Just a few days ago, we saw an incident between the Honorable Minister for the FCT and the military officer. And there have been a lot of representation that I've read in the media, which I thought that some, of course, got a point, others did not. They missed the point completely, and including a representation by a son. With all due respect, I think he misses the point. Now, what is it? The uniform is not about who is wearing it. The uniform represents the authority of the state. Whether it's a small boy or not, it is the authority of the state. It's even worse when it is a commission officer who has a presidential commission. And so, when you make such disparaging comments, you have desecrated the oath. You have desecrated the oath. What you have told the commander-in-chief and the authority that invested that position on him is that they are fools. So it is wrong. And I think that for the media, it is not about, in any case, law has two ends. For those, we also studied law. I'm not learned, but then in military law, we also taught that for you to be able to establish a crime, there are two elements: actus reus and mens rea. Actus reus, meaning that, was this thing done? Is there something that was done? And then the mens rea, what is the intention behind it? So when a son says that the minister has authority over land and it's not the duty of a soldier, that is not the issue. Now, if you have any reason to believe that what the young man is doing, there is a channel. That's the rule of law. So you desecrating the oath, it has not left the realm of what the officer was doing. It is an offense against the state. So this is what you, the media, must try to highlight. I know that over the years, we have lost our educational traction. Civics that ought to be taught, these are things that primary school pupils, secondary school pupils ought to know, that even adults don't know anymore. The whole essence of contracts, all right, the compact that you have with the state, that every individual has ceded his rights to the state, is because of things like this. So that we will not, at April 29, take laws into our hand. It is not a jungle. So if the state has, designated certain establishment and they gave them a uniform for you to be able to easily recognize them. Because today now, am I the CDS? I'm not CDS. Look at what I'm wearing. But assuming I was wearing uniform today, it's a different matter entirely. The officer that's in question, if you see him tomorrow wearing uniform, wearing mufti, you will not see him. So what distinguishes the police, the military, and other agencies is the uniform. And so we should respect and honor the uniform. And that's what we should tell our children. That every Nigerian, when you see them, are they doing what is right? They may not be doing what is right. But then it is not your duty to now lay your hands on them. So otherwise, we're in a jungle. That's exactly what's happening. That counter-terrorism has become a ding-dong thing. If you go to social media, nobody knows what is right and what is wrong. What was done with good intention is misinterpreted because of sins like that. And that's why I thought that since we're talking about media, terrorism, and national security,